Welcome to Vet Life Reimagined. I named this podcast because I wanted us to look at all of life when we reimagine what we would like our future to be. We are driven professionals, and we have a lot of layers to us. Interests and hobbies, life situations. I have guests who are dancers, weightlifters, fascinated by dinosaurs. The way our careers look can excitingly vary, but when it comes to our final question of gratitude, it almost always comes to our relationships with people, and many guests specifically call out their family. The people in our lives are essential, both at work and outside of work, and many of us play a special role that doesn't include anything vet-related in the title. Mom or dad? To honor our focus this month on children and parenthood, I have brought in the two veterinarians I consider the experts in the space when it comes to combining it with veterinary professionals. Dr. Emily Yunker is my first returning guest. I'll link her previous episode in the description. It's fantastic. She is known as the Veterinarian Doula. And Emily Singler wrote a book not long ago called Pregnancy and Postpartum Considerations for the Veterinary Team. She also advises on topics like parental leave from work. Today, we discuss the experiences of pregnancy and being mothers in a clinical setting, and we talk about challenges as well as joys and how this can impact our outlook as veterinary professionals. So let's get to the conversation with Doctors Emily Yunker and Emily Singler. I'm very excited to have our first episode with two guests. And Emily Yunker, you have been on the podcast before. So I do want to start with Emily Singler. And one of the questions I ask every guest is, when did you know you wanted to get into veterinary medicine? So what's the start of your veterinary story?
I'm one of those people that kind of knew from a very young age, from kind of before I can remember, that I just had a very strong affinity for animals and was always trying to take care of them and trying to rescue the baby birds with the broken wings or the baby bunnies that my family golden retriever was not so gently trying to play with.
Yep.
So that was me. I was the one who was always like, let's go to the zoo. Let's go to the farm. Let's ride horses. Let's go see the llamas and alpacas. Let's go see the dolphins. Kind of obsessed with all of it from a very young age. And I don't know where then the idea of being specifically a veterinarian came in, but I just know it's always been sort of part of my identity, always something that I just knew that I would do.
And you went to the University of Pennsylvania.
I'm from Pennsylvania. I'm from Pittsburgh, which is kind of on the western side of the state, almost in Ohio. And then I went to vet school at the University of Pennsylvania, which is in Philadelphia. It's a private school, the only vet school in the state.
And when you got into vet school, did you know what you wanted to do after vet school? Like, did you say, I know I want to be a small animal vet, or did it kind of change throughout your vet school?
It definitely changed. I did know what I wanted to do, and I did not end up doing that. So I wanted to be a zoo vet. I really, my dream was I wanted to work at SeaWorld, and I wanted to take care of the whales and dolphins. But I could have pictured myself at any zoo, and I did do an internship and some volunteering at the Pittsburgh Zoo when I was in high school and college. And so I saw a lot of the behind the scenes stuff and I just loved it. And when I started interviewing for vet school, I definitely got a lot of messages from current students and even from some of the faculty that being a zoo veterinarian was going to be really hard and that my chances of it actually happening were going to be low. So I kind of got these discouraging messages that it's going to be really hard to find a job. There was a lot of competition. You're definitely going to need a residency, maybe a PhD. So I kind of got those messages early on. And then I ended up getting married for the first time, sort of the end of my third year into fourth year, and made the decision at that point based on quality of life and not wanting to feel like I was in school forever, that I just wanted to go out and get a job. And so I didn't pursue any additional training. I kind of just abandoned the idea of being a zoo vet and went into small animal practice, shelter practice, and then private practice. But I never could have had any idea that I would be doing, what I'm doing now, which is what I really think I was meant to do. So it worked out.
Well, that's a big part of Vet Life Reimagined is the interesting journeys we all have in our careers. And one of the big topics we're here to discuss it is maternity and veterinary medicine, or parenthood. I'll broaden it because I am fascinated to get your perspectives on the non-birthing parent, we'll say,
Yes.
because
Yes.
as we were talking about before, watching my husband also go through this experience, it's a whole adventure for them too. So I think that's a important piece. And because I listened to another podcast that you've been on, I heard that you got pregnant pretty quickly after vet school. So
I did. Yes.
I'm curious, was that planned or was it a little bit of a surprise?
That was definitely not planned. It was very much wanted, but not planned. And I've never like provided this level of detail before, but it was just one of those sort of naive things where it was like, okay, I just graduated from vet school. I'm in a ton of debt. I haven't made any money yet. I just moved to a new city. We don't have health insurance. We could just go a few months without buying birth control and everything will be fine. Like what could possibly go, what could possibly happen? Like, well, that's what happens, especially when you're, like 26, at like the height of female fertility. But it was very much extremely wanted. Like I had, and all my friends, even in college, they're like, oh, Emily, she's just always talking about being a mom and having kids. I was the one talking about that when that was like not on anyone's radar. So it was wanted. I just didn't have a plan yet.
When you thought about having to tell work and you'd only been working there a few months, what were the thoughts that went through your head?
Oh, I was completely terrified about that part. So I was excited, but there was a lot of shock. There was a lot of more than I expected there would be, because I really still felt like I was trying to prove myself as a professional. And I really worried that this was going to make that effort much more complicated, that people were not going to take me seriously, because how irresponsible was I that I got a new job and all of a sudden I'm pregnant and I'm going to need what I didn't even know what I was going to need, accommodations, or I was going to need to go on maternity leave. And maybe they were going to think I wasn't going to come back. And just all of these thoughts that were grounded in just not knowing, not having any frame of reference, and all the messages that I was getting from my clients, from everyone around me. Are you old enough to be a doctor? How old are you? I got a lot of that. Can you talk to another doctor and get their feedback before you treat my pet? Can you ask someone else? So I did get a lot of that feedback of, I don't necessarily trust you. I don't see you as a doctor, as a professional. And I thought, well, this is not going to help that at all. So I felt almost not shame, but just fear when I was going to announce. And so I think I waited a while, and it was one of those things where I said, oh, please don't tell anybody. I don't want anybody to know. Let sort of worry and fear of the unknown dominate my thoughts a lot at that time, which I understand. I try to have a lot of compassion for that sort of former version of myself. I was doing the best that I could without a lot of guidance. But now I see how that also made things just more stressful for myself, because I think I would have gotten a lot more support if I had been more forthcoming with, kind of what I was dealing with and what I was going through.
Yeah. Now, Emily Yunker, your story is a little bit different because you had a plan. If I remember our conversation, you were like, I graduated vet school, and then I was like, all right, it's baby time. And you even picked where you wanted to work based off their healthcare insurance. So for you, when you did find out you were pregnant, did you also have maybe a little uneasiness when it came to, okay, now I have to tell work this? What were your thoughts? Because you did have a baby soon after vet school too. So what was the experience of having to, okay, now I have to tell my boss, my coworkers, and all of that?
Yeah, it was really, really different. And partially, I'd been there a little bit longer. So I'd started the summer after graduation. And then I heard someone call them the candy company veterinary corporation. And they have like an annual review process, especially when you're new. And the particular practice I was at was really on top of it. And so January, less than a year after graduation, but like next calendar year, we like sat down and we were talking about my sort of some of my like professional goals. But the practice manager also wanted to kind of get at what's going on in your personal life that may be, I mean, if you're willing to discuss it, that may impact those goals and how we can make sure you have a good quality of life. I was doing a long commute. It was a whole thing because I lived in a major city. And I told her, and I was happy to tell her, look, sometime during this calendar year, I would like to become pregnant. Like, I'm not saying we're having a baby by the end of the year. That's a little bit too much of a time crunch. I don't really know how this is going to play out. But something about that process of becoming pregnant may impact my hours I choose to work or something. And she was like, okay, just keep us in the know. And then literally like a month later, it was like, I'm pregnant. And so I was super excited to tell everybody. Everybody sort of knew this was coming. My staff were like elated. They immediately started like mothering me and were like, you're not allowed to take x-rays anymore. And they just sort of took over and they counted down the days to my first ultrasound so that they could find out whether I was having a boy or a girl. I mean, it was a lovely, supportive place to be at the time. And there's a lot of doctor turnover, but actually we had a pretty solid technical staff. And so like we were all sort of these women in our 20s and 30s hanging out together and listening to music and doing our job all day. And so like there was just a lot of camaraderie and it was a lovely experience for a first timer. So I have no complaints. I also didn't have any mental hangups on it. Like it was just, I mean, don't get me wrong, I was nervous and I was nervous about disclosing early, but not to work. I was nervous about disclosing early to the world at large because I felt like, and so I'm a planner and that means part of planning is thinking out worst case scenarios. What if I have a miscarriage and I have to untell everybody? That's kind of a big fear. And it's it's incredibly common. If we don't acknowledge that, then I think that we are not listening to the majority of women who've experienced this. And so I had to think through, like, how would I feel about untelling people? And I decided that for me personally, based on my personality and where I was in life at the time, that I actually wanted support from the people who knew me if I had a miscarriage. I wanted them to know so that they could support me through that. I didn't want to be alone with that experience. And so to me, it made sense to tell everybody early so that if I had something happen, that I wasn't carrying that alone. And that is a very personal choice. I'm not saying everybody should do it that way. But for me, it felt very much in alignment with what I wanted.
Yeah. I remember my mother, I don't remember if it was my dad or my mom who told me this, but my mom didn't want to tell anybody when she got pregnant with me. Like she waited until like she couldn't hide it anymore. Because she was, that exact fear was what happens if I have a miscarriage and now I have to share that. And I don't know if part of it is maybe you'll feel guilty for having a miscarriage, or I don't know, or it's a really hard thing to deal with, especially because people don't quite understand unless you've probably had a miscarriage too. You probably don't fully understand it. So I'm glad you had a good experience with your first time. My guess, and please correct me because you guys counsel and teach this all the time. My guess is that Emily Singler, your experience is probably a little bit more common for women. I don't know about not quite sure on how to tell, how to act, because a lot of the articles that I kept reading about in preparing for this, the word guilt kept coming up. And so what have you heard when you talk with people in the veterinary profession about just some of the feelings of being a working professional, like in veterinary medicine, and then getting pregnant and having to figure out how to communicate that, and do things change now? Like you said, with the x-rays, and Emily, your book is all about a lot of the safety concerns in the veterinary profession. But what have you heard from people?
Yeah. And if I could just add one comment to what we were talking about before with miscarriage, I did experience a late miscarriage in my third pregnancy. at 16 weeks. And so I had told everybody at that point at my work and my family and my community, everyone who was close to me knew. And so I did have to untell everybody. And at work, I did get a lot of support. And one of the first things that I asked for when the first person, my boss, I told him and he said, "What can I do to help you?" And I said, "Just tell everybody else because I don't want to have to say it 20 times." And so even though that, it felt painful, the idea of having to go and say, "Oh, because people they don't know. They mean well, you go out in public and they're like, 'Wow, you look so good.' And I'm like, 'I'm not pregnant anymore.' And they're like, 'Oh,' and there's that kind of awkward moment. And then people don't know what to say. They don't know what to say. And so I like a lot of times they don't say anything. And I've had people just be like, 'Oh, I'm so sorry.' And then they like immediately turn and like walk away. And they're like, because it is it's getting better, but I feel like it is still kind of a taboo topic. And just going through I went through a support group with my husband after we had our loss. And I learned there the idea of loss of innocence because we tend to go through life, at least when we're young, with this idea of bad things don't happen to good people. Like bad things don't happen when we do everything right. Something this terrible, like a child dying or a baby dying or, something that tragic, that just couldn't possibly happen. And then when it does happen, either to you or to like someone close to you, it's almost kind of like a secondary trauma for that person to just imagine that could happen. So I understand why a lot of people don't want to go there. You know what I mean? They don't want to imagine that could happen because there's nothing you can do to prevent it. It can happen without any kind of warning and it can happen to anybody. So it can be hard to like wrap your brain around. So I think that's part of why people don't like talking about it is because it's just so painful. But the people who've been through it, not everybody, but a lot of us need to talk about it. We need it to be acknowledged. We need that support. And I needed that for a long time. So it would have been hard for me if nobody had known that I was pregnant. And I think that would have been the case even if it had happened earlier on. I feel like it would have been hard for me because that completely enveloped my life at that point. Like that was my identity. It was like, I lost my baby and I can't think about anything else. I can't talk about it, that was it for me. And again, I know everyone's different. Some people have that happen and they're like, I just want to move on and I just want to look forward. And that's where they are and total respect for that. But for some people, it can be very helpful to have that understanding and support. So again, just my 2 cents on that. But to your question about attitudes in terms of being a professional, I mean, you still hear comments about, oh, well, women, they're just going to join the profession and then they're going to get pregnant and then they're not going to want to work anymore, or they're going to want to work part-time, or they're going to want to leave early. And so they're not as dedicated and they're not as reliable and they're not as professional because we have this old idea of work 50, 60 hours a week, always be on call, stay late, always be willing to do more. If you don't like it, you're in the wrong profession kind of mindset because that's how people in previous generations worked, which, as we go back generations, more and more was, it was a more preponderance of men who, if they had children, probably had a spouse who stayed at home, who took care of all of the child rearing and the household responsibilities. And so they felt completely comfortable, entitled, whatever the word is, to make their work their entire lives. And so now they're using that framework to judge. And I say women only because we still carry a lot of these gender norms where it's, even if you work, you still have to be the one to raise the children. And even if you work, you still have to be the one to call out when they're sick and pick them up from school and plan all the doctor's appointments and do all this stuff. So we're looking at women who are trying to be like empowered, professional, working women, but then they're also like, but don't forget you're a mom. So you still have to do all this other stuff too. And then we're judging women for it and saying, oh, look at, she's so unprofessional because she's always asking to leave early to get her kids. So it's kind of this impossible scenario that we're trying to break free of. And then sometimes men wonder why like women get mad and get upset about things and get ragey. And it's because we're sick of it. And, we need to keep talking about it more. And we need to be there to be, as much as I hate the word balance in terms of like work-life balance, we do need there to be more balance or just equity in between gender specific roles and just expectations in terms of how much is expected of each of us and what it means to be a good, dependable, reliable veterinary professional, because we can't use the old definition anymore. It's my opinion.
Emily, you have any other thoughts?
So in my work, because I do so much one-on-one work, I don't work with a lot of men as a doula. In vet world I do, but not in doula world. So I tend to use more gendered language. It just works for my population of people I'm working with. But every once in a while I do talk to a vet dad. It's unusual, I'm not going to lie. I was at a conference and I had a little booth last summer and I talked to, well over 100 people, probably a couple hundred people. And only 2 men talked to me. I did a giant pink booth with
Doesn't surprise me.
A puppy on it, like, and a kid and a baby. It wasn't like exactly like, yes, please come talk to me then. It was like a siren call for moms. That's what it was. But I did have 2 vet dads come and talk to me. And one of them was in the process of adopting. And he and his wife were both there. And that was a really cool conversation to have because they were like, I don't know where to get resources because the majority of what I'm finding is written for parents who are the birthing parents. And that is absolutely true. It is true. I was able to actually give them a couple of sort of resources. And I was really clear, like, hey, this is actually kind of outside my wheelhouse. I'm happy to talk about parenting. I'm happy to talk about like how you arrange leaves. And they were like lovely about it. They were from the very beginning had included parental leave for both parties and including adoption as part of their like baseline of what they were offering as their company. And I was like, yes, you're industry leaders and you set the stage and thank you for that. And that was a really cool conversation. And then on the flip side, I had a very brave man come and talk to me. And he was looking at this huge list I had that other people had put up on this whiteboard over the course of the weekend. And it was things that parents need postpartum. What is it that you actually need? And he was reading the list and he was kind of nodding. He's like, yeah, that sounds pretty legit. And then he was like, they need to just relax though. And he said, my wife is so tense all the time. She's just stressed out all the time. I'm like, honey, you just need to go relax. Like just, and on the one hand, I'm like, I mean, yeah, we could all use some like mindfulness skills and it's important for us to take time to relax, but also your entire attitude is basically like, she's taking on too much. Oh, but also I'm not taking on anything. I mean, of course I didn't say that. I actually wasn't sure what to say. I just sort of nodded and I was sort of like, maybe she feels like she's taking on too much. And I just like left it. That is the most stereotypical male response I've ever heard in my entire life. And I don't know what to say now. So it is still out there. And it's out there even among highly educated men with children who have the lived reality of having children. And so like it hasn't gone away. It's still there. So for all the men out there who are going to listen to this episode, I'm sure there will be some. Recognize that sometimes when you don't necessarily see the mental load of the women in your life in general, but especially those who are in the parenting phase of life, that when she expresses a strong emotion of some kind, if you have the capacity to sit with that discomfort and then be curious about it and explore why she's having this moment of rage, it might give you a whole lot of insight and you guys can really work together to make that a better relationship and better experience. Like there's things men can do about this.
That's a great point to kind of combine all of this. One, I've watched my father-in-law. They are actually raising 2 grandchildren right now. And he refuses to do any diapers. His job apparently is just to play. And then when it's time to do those things, he hands it over to the women. So I see that generation and that mindset. But then I also see a lot of men our age who really, I think, are also embracing being present fathers, being a total family. I have a good friend who is about to have a baby, but just talking with him and seeing him light up, and he's like, yep, we're already cleaning out a area in my office right here in the vet hospital, and my wife's going to come, and we're just going to be one happy family in the vet hospital. And so I think that we are trying to change our perspective around the value of family and the things that bring a lot of meaning into our lives. And while we are very passionate professionals, at the end of the day, our clients will forget about us, but it's our family that will always be part of us and who we are and who we usually say we're grateful for. So you also talked a lot about the mental aspect of being pregnant, being a mom. There's a lot that goes into this. Physically, my doctor gave me permission that I'm allowed to blame anything on being pregnant because your body just does whatever it wants to do. But at the same time, you talked about, a lot of stress just in general. It comes with our profession. I mean, we talk about this all the time, like mental health, and we're not bringing up being parents. We're just saying mental health in the profession, right? So I think that's something that's also really unique about parenthood and being in a medical profession is layers of stress and things that are going on. And then not to mention all of the crazy things that are happening when you're pregnant. I know Emily Yunker, we talked about matrescence, which I find totally fascinating. It's also a little overwhelming to think about. So how do you handle or help people go through all this crazy stuff that is going on?
Hey, Singler, I'm going to let you take this first because I feel like you have a lot of lived experience here, and I want you to have a chance to share some of your experience in this.
Sure. So I think, like you said, Megan, there are just so many layers. So there's the stress of life, there's the stress of veterinary practice. In my book, I looked into some studies, trying to answer the question, are we more attracted to the field of veterinary medicine because we're already predisposed to mental health disorders? And the studies that I looked at said, no, we're just kind of the same as the regular population. In that, some of us are more predisposed and some of us are less predisposed. However, going through veterinary school and being in the profession definitely increases our risk. And it starts in school when we get all these messages of basically disregard yourself and your own needs and devote everything to your studies. And if you're not doing that, you're not good enough. And I do think it's changing now. So I think there's a lot more of an awareness now. I'm thinking back to when I was in school. I graduated in 2005. There were definitely a lot of messages about, why do you want to go home? You need to be here. You need to be here earlier. You need to be here late. You need to be on the weekends. And who cares? There's no understanding for anything else. And I think now, we've just become more aware of that as a society. And so that's translating into veterinary school education to a degree where there's more of an understanding that we need to care for the whole person from the beginning. And we need everyone to have kind of a more healthy mindset and more reasonable expectations about what we can expect of ourselves and of other people. So I think that's a good thing. But I do think just historically, and this has been studied in human medical education too, just the way that process starts out is we're kind of setting ourselves up for being, gluttons for punishment. We just keep pushing ourselves more and more and judging ourselves if we ever don't feel like we're meeting this ridiculously high, unreachable standard. So that doesn't help. And then there are the pressures that we all feel just kind of in the workplace in general, and whether it's interacting with clients or whether it's financial constraints where we can't actually treat our patients the way we want to, toxic work environments, sometimes all of that. So all of that contributes. And then, of course, some of us are going to be more predisposed for just mental health disorders in general. I definitely have a propensity for anxiety and depression. And then there are all the hormones that come along with pregnancy and the sleep deprivation and the fatigue and everything else that all just kind of like pile on top of each other. And it doesn't just start after you have we think a lot about like postpartum depression, but it's really, we need to think of it more globally as a perinatal mental health. So it can start during pregnancy. And I'm definitely not a mental health expert, but this is just what I've learned in studying for the book and my own experiences, is that you can start to experience anxiety, depression, and other disorders, even if you've never had them before during pregnancy, and all sort of the pressures of life and your professional life and everything add to it. I had significant experiences with postpartum depression and anxiety with my last two pregnancies, and the pregnancies that were very much wanted and very much planned and very much hoped for, prayed for, all that kind of stuff. But then I found myself just basically rendered completely unable to function and just begging for help from those around me. It takes nothing to just throw you into a fit of tears or just complete despair. I think despair was a word that I probably identified with a lot during that period. And it took other people around me, to my doctor, my family members, friends, to say, hey, I think you need some help. So a combination of medication and therapy and just having a supportive environment has helped me a lot. I don't think there's one right answer for everybody, but I will say that just being in isolation makes everything worse. Feeling like you don't have anyone to talk to about it, like you're the only one, no one understands, that will create all of these lies in your head that there's something wrong with you and that you'll never be okay, and that you should just try harder, or that you're not a good mom, not a good parent. And fathers, non-birthing parents, men, women, can also experience these types of perinatal mental health disorders. You don't have to have given birth to a child to have them. It can happen to all of us. So, I mean, I think the most important message is to try to have as much of a support network as you can, as early on as possible, no matter where you are in your journey. And if you find yourself struggling, just tell somebody, like anybody that you feel is a safe person, just tell them, because you're not alone. There's so many people, I think, who are suffering in silence and who don't talk about it, that it's so much more common than you think it is. And if we can start talking about it, we can all feel, I think, less stigma about it, less like we did something wrong or there's something wrong with us, and just more comfortable getting help. There are medications that I think most healthcare providers are very comfortable prescribing, even if you're pregnant. I'm not a human healthcare provider, but I took, antidepressants all throughout my last pregnancy. I took them while I was breastfeeding two babies. So again, that depends on your comfort level, your healthcare provider, all that kind of stuff. But in many cases, it is possible. And finding a good therapist can be huge. I still see my therapist that I started seeing after I had my third child. It's been, 5 years now. I still see her. I love her. And she knows me well enough now that she can kind of catch me when I'm in my self-blaming cycles and be like, now, wait a minute, we've talked about this. So it's really helpful to have someone like that in your life, whether it's, a paid professional or, a trusted family member or friend who can just help you be a little more objective and help you realize that you're probably being harder on yourself than is helpful and then you need to be, and that you're doing so much better than you maybe have made yourself believe that you are. So yeah, try to find community, because that can go a long way towards helping you feel better.
Yeah. And I wanted to start with Emily in particular, because I feel like humans are storytelling animals. We connect better and we honestly learn information better when we are told in a story format. And that tends to be the way I do things. But in opposite, today, in this particular topic, I'm going to slightly globalize a little bit more and say that observationally, among the veterinarians I work with, perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, PMADs, are incredibly common. I did write a little article for Vet Girl about this, and I sort of outline them. So most people have heard of postpartum depression. but they sort of take that definition at face value and they feel like it's only postpartum and it's only depression. And so if your clinical signs do not come postpartum and they don't fit the description of depression, then they don't know what's happening. And PMADS is a much better term in that it's more encompassing of all the variety of things that you can experience postpartum. And they also say that veterinarians and actually psychologists and psychiatrists all love definitions. The definition is to some extent not very helpful. You can look at the checklist online and feel like you do or do not fit the things on that checklist. But I'll also say that sleep deprivation alone will cause half the things on that checklist. So if you have a baby who doesn't sleep, you could probably be diagnosed with just about any mood disorder out there. It actually doesn't necessarily mean that you need drugs. It means you need sleep. And so what I kind of tell people is, I don't want you to get too hung up on the definition. What I want you to recognize is that if you are struggling, you need help. That's the thing I want you to recognize. And so if you can get help from someone so you can sleep, do so. If you need to go outside and move your body, get some help to do so. If you need to feed yourself, I'm shocked at how many women just sort of forget to eat when they have newborns, then do so. And if you have met your basic needs and you are struggling, keep asking for help. That means going to your doctor and saying, I'm struggling and I need help. That means calling your therapist and saying, I'm struggling and I need help. That means saying to your spouse, I'm struggling and I need help. And hopefully those people in your life also recognize when you're struggling and they can point out to you, hey, having an afternoon off and taking a nap did not fix this. I think you need more help. And so you don't necessarily have to know what your diagnosis is before you go to your doctor. And veterinarians who have a history of needing mental health support are actually better about this. They're like on it. They're like, if I see these particular signs, I'm going to call my doctor. They're on it. It's the ones who this is the first time it's happening to them that it is confronting. They're like, I made it all the way through my teens and my 20s and vet school and my residency, and I was fine. And now you're telling me that this tiny human is setting me over the edge? And you're like, yes, that's what I'm telling you. Absolutely what I'm telling you. And so I think that that population is the one that struggles the most. And I remember seeing a list, this is years and years ago, of like, if 3 of the following things have happened to you in the last year, then your risk for depression is higher. And I was looking at it through the lens of parenting. And I was like, every single parent has had a minimum of 8 things on this list. And it's like, oh, this is very clarifying. And I had this blog post once where I said, what if it's not the hormones? And I will say hormones do play into this, but I was like, what if it's not the hormones? What if it's the fact that you've had an incredibly dramatic change in your body in a very short period of time? And some of that change feels physically bad and you're alone and you're tired and you're malnourished and you've had to give up your favorite hobbies and all of your relationships have been changed and all of your priorities have shifted and you're not really sure what you're doing anymore. And you used to feel like you knew you kind of had it together and now you have no idea what you're doing and you don't know who to talk with. Maybe that's what's going on and there's nothing wrong with your brain. And I wish that more people had that conceptualization that this is not a judgment on you and your quality as a human. This is a reflection of the challenges in life that you are facing and the fact that you need more resources to meet these challenges.
Wow. Those were fantastic. And I am very grateful that I have grown up with great parents who I have a child psychiatrist for a father, and my mother is a teacher who got her master's in early childhood and development. So I've been around conversations about everything from parenting to mental health and things like that. And I think that has helped me. It hasn't prevented me from having challenges, but it allows me to be very aware and know who I can go to if I do need support. So I think, also knowing both of you, knowing some of those things, knowing I need help. And first of all, this is something I say a lot. Life is so much more fun doing it with other people. And so, just there. But life is also really challenging. It's unpredictable. It's, changes happen, which are hard. And it's okay. And it's more than okay. Like, get that support system and as early as possible. So I want to surround myself with information in the support system. So not that I'm necessarily going to know everything and be prepared for everything that's going to happen, but I know that I have that support system. So when those things do happen, I know who to go to. And so I think that also helps me have a little bit of comfort in just knowing it's like I'm not alone. I've got my resources. And when I say resources, I like the human being aspect of it. Yes, it's good to know that there's a book out there. And I think, Emily, your book is so crucial because I think we need to know those details, especially when it comes down to safety and all those things in the workplace. I think that's so crucial because that's part of the support system. As a coworker, you need to know those things so you can be a good support system for other people in the hospital. I remember when I was an intern, we had multiple people pregnant in my 1-year internship and a vet tech, veterinarians, everybody. So it takes a village, they say, to raise human beings. It takes a village to support the parents, I think. So I really think that's one of the best take homes. If anybody, it only takes one thing, is just to make sure that you have a really good support system. We didn't even get to a fraction of my questions, but that's okay.
Sorry.
It's a good topic. No, this is great.
That's how it goes, I find.
Yes. I think this one question was really interesting. It slightly came from some of the different things I was reading, but has parenthood changed your life as a veterinarian?
Oh, man. Yes. So we made it clear that I was a planner and I didn't just have like my pregnancy plan. I had like a 10-year plan. And I have like ever since elementary school. And my plan was that I was going to have as long a maternity leave as I could manage, but then I was going to go back to work full time and I was going to have it all. I was going to be a full-time working mom and eventually work towards owning my own practice. And during my maternity leave, I was several weeks into it and realized at that moment, the feeling I had in my body in that moment was, I never want to be separated from this human again. That is not universal, but that was my personal experience. The best way I could describe it for me was that it felt like there was a literal part of my body, like an arm, but it was an entire separate thing living a life separate than me. I didn't even want him in a different room, to be perfectly honest. Again, this is not universal, but this was my experience. So when I went back to work, it was a like schism of identity for me. I felt like a whole part of my soul was missing. And it was excruciating. And I still loved being a veterinarian. And so that was like, I could not make those two things come together in my brain. And I continued working. I have never stopped working except for, a few months here and there where I was moving or having babies. But my relationship to my job definitely changed. The job was something I enjoyed doing, but it was a means to an end. I mean, instantly, that was the change. I maybe someday will consider practice ownership in some capacity, but that right now and for the last decade has felt like something I'm not even entertaining. I've never met someone who started a practice who didn't put like less than 60 to 80 hours a week into it for, possibly years on end. And I'm like, literally nothing in me wants that. So yeah, it absolutely changed my relationship with vet med forever. By the time I had baby number 3 during a global pandemic, which I know Singular relates to, that was a singularly different experience than my others. And that was when I realized that I had something in me that wanted to support other people through their experiences. And so for right now, the veterinarian doula is sort of my like side gig that I squeeze in on Fridays and Sundays. But I would like to grow that more and really be able to do that on a truly professional level where I provide information and resources for workplaces and for parents of all kinds entering parenthood in different ways. And so that while that is not vet med, it is absolutely vet med. It's supporting the people of vet med. And, statistically, 85% of people become parents. That's the majority of the working world. And so if we are, and that's men and women, if we are pretending that parenting is not part of how we make our professional decisions, we're just being naive.
I would say like I barely know being a veterinarian without being a mom, just given how early I started, but certainly, just like Yunker said, it completely changed my outlook on everything. And it's definitely been a journey because, when I graduated from school, I was very gung-ho and I was like, I'm a doctor and this is my career and this is the only thing that defines me and only thing I'm going to do forever. And then I had my daughter who now is about to turn 18. But at the time I was like, okay, I just like you said, Emily Yunker, I never, ever, ever wanted to be separated from her. I was like, no, I'm going to be the one to hold her everywhere I go. She's going with me. And I took her to some places, like not anything bad. Like I went to do like a presentation at the local college and I like didn't take her to daycare because I didn't want to leave her. But like it was like really disruptive. Like just like not a good idea. But I was just so like attached to her. Like I didn't want to be without her. And so I did not want to go back to work. And for a while, I definitely felt some resentment about that because work was the thing that was keeping me from my daughter. Now, even though I felt that way internally, I still put forth every ounce of effort and was a good veterinarian and was liked by my colleagues and my clients and did a good job. It was just internally, I was having this struggle. And I think part of that comes from just just all the changes that happen to you when you become a parent, but also then all the pressure to like work full time and provide and then do everything else on top of that. It just felt kind of like soul crushing some of the time. And it's really been a journey. Being a parent, becoming a parent changed my outlook forever, but it's been a journey back to feeling more. I never stopped loving the profession, but feeling more kind of like in love with it again. I didn't stop working at all either. There was one point where I took a year, like an extended maternity leave with my second child. Other than that, I've never stopped working. I've been in various capacities and I'm not doing anything clinical at this very moment. But I think it took finding my own unique spin on it and also just seeing some changes in the profession where people started talking about how, yes, we should be able to have a good quality of life while working in veterinary medicine. Hearing that finally prioritized and spoken about by others where I thought I was just being kind of selfish all these years, kind of secretly wanting that, hearing that kind of like turn in the tide really made me feel a lot more hopeful about working in vet med and staying in vet med. But then also finding my own unique ways to kind of do vet med, both branching out into doing relief work. And I tried mobile and seeing how other people practice. That really helped me. Writing really helped me a lot. Writing my book just brought me this whole new love for the ways that we can all add to our profession and enjoy it and make it better. And now I'm doing a combination of writing and finishing my certification to become a certified parental leave coach so that I can continue to try to work with both individuals and employers and try to really move the needle there, not just entirely specifically about parental leave, but I think that is a big part of it that is sometimes missing altogether or at least needs a lot of work. And I'm also a big proponent of getting non-birthing parents into the conversation and encouraging them to own their needs, their wants, their desires as a parent, because I think that really helps and elevates all of us. So all of that has brought me a lot of joy and brought me a lot closer to the profession. But I'll never be the same as I was before I had a kid. And now I'm happy about that. It's a good thing.
Exactly. Well, that's fantastic. So one final question, because I do remember when you are a 20, 30 something, you tend to get more and more friends that have children. And they seem to love to tell like the worst of the worst stories so that so I keep reminding them, it's like, you're not helping people who don't have children. So I want to flip this. I want to hear, what is one of the proudest moments you have had as a mother?
Oh, to pick one.
All right, I've got a little short one that's cute.
Okay.
Yeah, go.
Okay. So each of my children has gone through a phase, but it was obviously kind of the most novel and precious with the first. In the mornings when we would get ready and I had to take the baby to daycare and then get to work on time, it was intense. I lived in a second floor apartment at the time. And so I would baby wear the baby, and then I would have the big diaper bag on one side. I would have my purse on my back. I would have my professional bag with my big lunch and my pump and all of the things I needed to take to work with me on the other arm. And I would walk down the stairs with these 3 giant bags and this baby. And I weighed myself one day and it was over 50 pounds. And I did this both directions every day for work. And they're watching us and we don't even know how much they're watching us. And one day, my little toddler who couldn't even like really talk yet starts gathering things from around the room and like draping them over himself. And then he walks up and he goes, "Mommy, work." And, and it was very clear that he was gathering all of his bags together to go to work. On one hand, it was hilarious to see it played out in like a toddler version. But it did kind of make me really proud because I had this moment of being like, look what he's seeing. He is seeing how much I'm putting into this. Like I feel seen by a toddler, and it's not awful. Like it's not like, oh, look at the drudgery I'm doing. It's like, look at our joyful morning routine, even if it is kind of ridiculous at this moment of life. And to see each of my other children replay that in some way or another, where they're getting ready to go somewhere just like mommy and they're like gathering all their things together. I don't know. It just strikes me as they see what we're doing. And if we enjoy what we're doing and we find meaning in it, then they know that they can find joy and meaning in what they choose to do with their life. And that life isn't about just being drudgery. It's about finding something that fulfills you. And I just thought that was lovely.
Kids are really smart.
Yeah.
They're very observant. Yeah.
They definitely are. They're always watching you. I've been struggling to decide what to share, but I think being a working mom, sometimes, at least for me, like the mornings are rough and it's hard to leave them and like kind of break away and go to work. And there's guilt and all that stuff that goes along with that. But for me, one of the sweetest parts of the day is when either, you walk in the door and the kids are home, or like right now, a lot of times I like go into daycare and pick them up, or my older kids when they were like in elementary school, when I would go pick them up and they just run to you and you have this like sweet reunion at the end of the day. And they ask you about what you did. And like when my daughter, now they're not allowed to use their phones in school, but it used to be, I would like send her I would take little pictures of the cute dogs and cats and everything. And I would send them to her throughout the day. And she would just like send me back all these like heart eyes and like all these emojis and everything. And they were very excited about what I was doing. And they were just so excited to see me at the end of the day. I mean, you think of like, you come home and like your dog is excited to see you, and that's wonderful. And I love that too. But just when I walk in the door, or now that I'm working from home, my husband will pick the little ones up and they'll rush to me at my computer and like climb up in my chair with me, and just that wonderful embrace. And they've missed you so much, but they're so happy to see you. And it's just the most wonderful, wonderful part of the day. And just knowing that they've had a good day, but that they're so happy to be with you and they're so proud of you. And they find all of their comfort and their rest and their peace from you. I mean, it's just such an honor and a privilege to be that person for them, because they are so precious and so completely trusting in you for everything. I just love those moments. So they fill me with so much joy.